Okay, imagine this. Organizations with no offices, like none, and maybe no traditional bosses either.
Mm,
What if a company was just run entirely online by its own community? Its investors, maybe?
sounds pretty out there, doesn't it? Sci-fi, almost.
Right. But it's actually happening. It's the world of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs.
And they're moving serious money,
Yeah.
coordinating big projects globally. It's really shaking things up.
Definitely. And stirring up big debates, too, about, like, are they legitimate? How do you even regulate something like that? Or should you?
Yeah, the core idea is fascinating. It's a total rethink of how organizations are structured.
No headquarters, no CEO in the traditional sense.
Exactly. Just code, smart contracts living on a blockchain. That's what runs the show, essentially.
So today, we're going to unpack exactly that, what DAOs are, how this mix of tech and people actually works.
Right. The nuts and bolts, but also the good stuff, the advantages they might offer.
And the risks. We have to talk about the risks and the legal messiness around them.
Definitely. It's complex.
Yeah, and we've got some great material to work with here. Insights from the Harvard Law School Forum's primer on DAOs.
Good stuff.
A piece from Virtus Interpress asking, is the state still necessary with this kind of governance?
That would really make you think.
And Cyberpiece looking at the cybersecurity threats, which are very real, plus stuff from Emina Bank, 16's Crypto, Colony blog, some academic papers.
It's a pretty wide range of perspectives.
Exactly. Our goal is to give you a clear picture, cut through the jargon a bit, what's real, what's hype, what are the big challenges.
Yeah, hopefully give you some solid takeaways without making your head spin.
So let's start at the beginning. What is a DAO, fundamentally?
Okay, so at its heart, think of it as basically an online business organization. It doesn't have the usual corporate structure, and it runs on blockchain software.
An online community, maybe?
Right.
With a shared bank account and a goal.
That's a good way to put it. A shared treasury, a shared purpose. And the key difference is it's governed directly by its members or investors, the people who put skin in the game.
So no board of directors, no managers telling people what to do.
Not in the usual sense, no.
Yeah.
It's the code, the software, that lays down the rules.
Okay, so these smart contracts, that's the code we're talking about. They're like the rule book.
Precisely. They're self-executing pieces of code. The rules for governance, how decisions get made, how funds are spent, it's all written into the contract.
And because it's on a blockchain, every transaction, every vote, it's all out in the open public record.
Exactly. It creates this radical transparency. Everything is recorded permanently, immutably. Anyone can usually look it up.
And if someone wants to change the rules
Yeah.
or the DAO's mission,
They propose it. They write up a proposal, submit it to the network, and then the members vote on it. That's the governance mechanism.
right, so code is key, but people are obviously still making the decisions through voting. How does that work day to day, the tech and the human side?
Well, the smart contracts are the engine, right? They automate the rules, manage the money based on those rules. No need for a human treasurer in the middle, necessarily.
Okay.
And the blockchain is the ledger, the public, unchangeable record of everything that happens.
Now, there's this phrase, code is law. What does that really mean here?
Yeah. That goes back a bit. Lessig talked about it. The idea is that the code itself is the regulatory framework for the organization. It dictates what can and can't happen.
So disagreements are settled by what the code allows.
In theory, yes. It leads to this concept at Zori called trust by computation. You trust the code to execute fairly, rather than trusting, say, a human manager or institution.
That's a huge mental shift, trusting algorithms instead of people.
It is. But how do those people, the members, actually reach decisions? You mentioned voting, but what kinds are there?
Yeah, how does the voting work? Is it just one person, one vote?
Rarely that simple. There's actually a whole menu of options DAOs are experimenting with.
Like what?
Well, the simplest is just, simple majority. More than 50% wins. Good for quick, everyday decisions.
Okay.
Then you might have a supermajority, meeting maybe 2/3 or even 3/4 of the vote for really big decisions. Things like changing the core rules. Aragon uses that, for example.
Makes sense for critical stuff.
Yeah. Then there's quadratic voting. Gitcoin uses this one. It's interesting. It lets people show how strongly they feel. Your second vote on an issue costs more than your first, your third more than your second, and so on.
So you spend more voting power on things you really care about.
Exactly. It can help minority opinions have more weight if they feel strongly. Prevents simple majority rule on everything.
What else?
Weighted voting is common. Your voting power depends on how many tokens you hold. More tokens, more say.
So aligned with your financial stake.
Right. Then there's reputation-based voting.
Mm-hmm.
Your influence grows based on your past contributions, your standing in the community.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about money.
Not necessarily. And there's delegative voting, sometimes called liquid democracy. Aragon does this too. You can vote yourself, or you can delegate your vote to someone you trust to vote for you.
Kind of like representative democracy, but more flexible.
Sort of, yeah. And finally, some aim for consensus voting, like Dash. Trying to get everyone, or almost everyone, to agree builds real cohesion, but can be slow.
Wow. Okay. Lots of different flavors of democracy being tried out there.
Definitely. Each with its own pros and cons, speed versus inclusion, risk of gridlock.
Right. So let's talk advantages. Why are people excited about this model? What's the upside?
Well, the big one is direct control for members. You don't need layers of management or intermediaries like banks. It's more direct.
And the transparency we talked about. Everything's public on the blockchain.
Huge plus. Also, efficiency. Setting up a DAO can be faster and cheaper than a traditional company. You can have members all over the world easily. Lower overhead, potentially.
Does it lead to better decisions?
That's the hope. Faster discussions, maybe?
Yeah.
Input from a really diverse group of stakeholders who are directly invested could lead to smarter outcomes.
And attracting talent.
Yeah, that's another point. People can contribute more autonomously. That appeals to certain kinds of highly skilled individuals who want that freedom.
And the trust factor, again, with the smart contracts handling funds.
Right. The self-executing code makes it harder, not impossible, but harder for funds to be misused and provides that permanent record. Builds trust in the system itself.
Okay, that all sounds pretty good. But there have to be downsides, right? What are the big risks or problems?
Oh, absolutely. It's not all smooth sailing. First off, the potential for scams is real. Ponzi schemes, rug pulls, especially in the crypto space where many DAOs operate.
Yeah, you hear about those.
Then there are the risks tied to crypto itself. The value of tokens can swing wildly. The count of smart contracts can have bugs or flaws.
And hacking. Cybersecurity.
Big time. We've seen major hacks. Badger DAO lost millions. Axie Infinity's Ronin Bridge got hit hard. Billions have been stolen across the DeFi and DAO space. It's a constant battle.
And what about the legal side? You mentioned messiness.
Yeah, that's a huge one. For most DAOs, their legal status is unclear, murky.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, if a DAO hasn't specifically set itself up as like an LLC or some recognized legal entity, the default in many places might be a general partnership.
And that means?
Unlimited liability for the members. If the DAO gets sued or owes money, the members' personal assets could potentially be at risk. That's a major deterrent.
Wow, okay. That's serious.
Very. And it makes basic business things hard, like signing contracts. Who signs for the DAO? Can they even enforce a contract if they don't have clear legal standing?
Right. And regulations, securities laws.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Regulators like the SEC in the U.S. often look at the tokens. It's DAOs issue the governance tokens and say, hey, those look like securities.
Which means
they should be registered with ongoing reporting, disclosures.
Yeah.
All things designed for traditional companies with clear leadership. It's incredibly hard for a truly decentralized group to comply with that. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, as the Harvard Law primer points out. The laws weren't built for this structure.
So the regulations just don't map onto how DAOs actually operate.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there are governance issues within the DAO itself.
Even with all the voting mechanisms.
Yeah. Decentralization is the goal, but sometimes you still get like de facto leaders, maybe the founding developers or people who bought up a ton of tokens early on, whales, who end up having most of the say.
So power can still concentrate.
It can. And making changes can be really slow. You need a vote, then you need developers to actually change the code. It can stifle adaptation.
Compared to a CEO just making a call.
Exactly. Sometimes professional management is faster or more effective. Plus, there's the risk of governance attacks. Malicious actors trying to get enough voting power to pass harmful proposals, like draining the treasury.
Ooh.
And if things go south, just getting your money out can be tricky. Transaction fees on the blockchain, gas fees can be high. Sometimes the only way out is this thing called rage quitting, where you basically force the DAO to burn your tokens and give you back a share of the remaining assets, often at a loss.
Doesn't sound ideal.
Not at all. And we should mention the environmental impact, too. Some blockchains use a lot of energy, though that's changing somewhat, like with Ethereum moving to proof of stake.
Right. And Cyberpeace mentioned other threats besides just hacking.
Yeah, specific vulnerabilities in the smart contracts themselves.
Yeah.
Things like forensic attacks where code can be tricked into sending funds multiple times, Oracle problems where the external data feeding into the smart contract is manipulated, Sybil attacks creating fake identities to gain influence, DDoS attacks trying to overload the network. It's a complex threat landscape.
It really sounds like they're operating in a kind of wild west, legally and technically. What are governments or regulators trying to do about it?
Well, it's slow going. Like we said, the SEC sees many tokens as securities, creating compliance nightmares. There's some talk in the U.S. Congress bills like RFIA, DCCPA trying to create clearer rules for digital assets.
Are they helping?
Maybe eventually. But they still often lean on old tests, like the Howey test from the 1940s, to decide what's a security, which, again, doesn't always fit DAOs well. So uncertainty continues.
And what about that Tornado Cash situation? That seemed like a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. When IRFAC, the U.S. Treasury Agency, sanctioned Tornado Cash, a crypto mixer protocol, and even arrested a developer, that sent shockwaves.
Why?
Because it targeted the code itself and the developers. It raised huge questions about privacy, censorship resistance, and how you regulate decentralized tools that could be used for illicit purposes but also have legitimate uses. It really highlights the tension between crypto ideals and government control.
Yeah, a real clash there. Are any places actually creating specific laws for DAOs?
A few U.S. states are trying. Vermont, Wyoming, Tennessee. They've created new types of legal structures like DAO LLCs, trying to give them some legal certainty.
Not just a few states.
Right. So many DAOs try to use other structures as a workaround, setting up as a standard LLC in Delaware, maybe, or a cooperative in Colorado. Some use foundations in places like the Cayman Islands as a sort of legal wrapper, or LLCs in the Marshall Islands.
Sounds complicated, like legal gymnastics.
It often is. Imperfect solutions. Remember Constitution DAO, the one that tried to buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah, they raised a ton of money.
They did. But they had to use a mix of partnerships and traditional legal entities just to be able to bid at the auction. The DAO structure itself wasn't equipped for that kind of real-world transaction.
So the legal framework, or lack thereof, is a massive hurdle.
One of the biggest.
This seems to tap into some really deep questions, doesn't it? Beyond just business structures. About power, control, the role of the state.
Absolutely. And there's academic work looking right at that. Zori, for instance, explores how blockchain and DAOs might be challenging the traditional power of the nation-state.
How so?
Well, the argument some make is that the state itself can be a single point of failure, too centralized, maybe inefficient or corruptible. And blockchain offers this alternative based on, code is law and trust by computation.
Replacing trust in government with trust in code.
That's the radical vision some proponents have. It echoes older ideas, actually. Critiques of centralized power, shades of Marxism's withering away of the state, or even anarcho-capitalist ideas about private governance.
But surely there are counter-arguments. Is everyone convinced DAOs can or should replace state functions?
Oh, definitely not. Big concerns exist. One is that you might just create new hierarchies, a sort of blockchain governance oligarchy, as Zori puts it.
Meaning?
Power ends up concentrated with those who have the technical skills, the coding knowledge, or those who got in early and accumulated lots of tokens. Not exactly decentralized democracy then, is it? And many argue the state is still essential for coordination, for providing public goods, for setting baseline rules and protections. A fully stateless world run by code that has its own potential dangers could lead to what some call amoral anti-politics, where efficiency trumps ethics or social good.
And practical stuff too, right? Like taxes.
Exactly. How does a DAO pay taxes? In the U.S., the IRS says crypto is property. Okay. But who is responsible for reporting and paying for a DAO that has no legal form, no headquarters, members everywhere? It's a huge headache.
Any potential solutions there?
Some are looking at structures like unincorporated nonprofit associations, UNAs, as 16's crypto suggests, that might fit some DAOs, especially nonprofit ones. But again, it's trying to fit this new thing into existing boxes. It shows just how fundamental these legal and tax questions are. How do you tax something that legally might not even exist in a way laws recognize?
It's mind-bending. So despite these big questions, we are seeing DAOs operate in the real world. We mentioned Constitution DAO. Any other examples that show what they're doing?
Yeah, definitely. Moloch DAO is a good one. It focuses on funding development for the Ethereum ecosystem. It's basically a grant-giving DAO, where members vote on which projects to support. Shows how they can allocate resources for a common goal.
Okay, like a decentralized foundation.
Kind of. Then there's Ples DAO. They collect culturally significant NFTs, digital art, collectibles, and manage them collectively, sometimes for charity, Shows the community ownership aspect.
So digital art collecting run by a group.
Right. Maker DAO is a big one in DeFi, decentralized finance. They run a stablecoin, DAI. They actually transitioned from being run by a foundation to being governed more fully by the DAO members. Shows that evolution is possible.
And any examples where things didn't work out?
Oh, sure. There was Spice DAO. They bought a rare art book related to the movie Dune, thinking they could use it to make their own animated series.
It's ambitious.
Very. But they ran into huge issues with intellectual property rights. Owning the book didn't give them the rights to make a film. It highlighted how DAOs still need real-world business sense, project management, understanding IP law, things traditional companies handle. Enthusiasm isn't enough.
So a reality check there.
Definitely. And you see DAOs popping up for all sorts of things now. Friends with Benefits is like a decentralized social club. City DAO is trying to, believe it or not, buy land and build a crypto-governed city.
Oh.
And even political action DAOs, like 30H DAO or Lobby 3 DAO, trying to use the model for political influence and lobbying. It's diversifying rapidly.
It really is an amazing spectrum, from funding code to buying land to lobbying. Okay, this has been a really deep dive. As we wrap up, what are the absolute key things people should take away about DAOs?
I think the main thing is understanding they're a genuinely new way to organize. They use tech, blockchain, smart contracts to coordinate people and resources in a decentralized way. That's the core idea.
But with huge potential and huge challenges running side by side.
Exactly. Massive potential for transparency, efficiency, member control, but also very real risks around security, legal status, effective governance, and regulation. There's this fundamental tension. The push for decentralization versus the need for workable legal frameworks and safety nets.
Yeah, I was definitely struck by the sheer number of different voting systems they're trying out. It's like a live experiment in governance. And the legal uncertainty is, wow, it's a biggie.
It really is, which leads to a good question maybe for listeners to think about. As these DAOs keep developing, what role do you actually see them playing in the future? In work, online communities, maybe even governance more broadly?
And what are the biggest roadblocks that have to be solved for them to grow responsibly?
Or maybe think about this. How do we find a balance between letting this innovation flourish, because there's clearly something interesting here, and protecting people, ensuring stability, applying sensible regulation? Where's that sweet spot?
Lots to chew on there. Well, if this has got you curious, maybe check out some of those DAO examples we mentioned, or dig a bit deeper into the tech or the legal debates. There's plenty more to explore.
For sure. It's a space that's moving incredibly fast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for this exploration today.